My cousin died of a hemorrhage during childbirth. To maintain the alliance between our families and ensure her son inherited the title, my uncle forced me to marry the Earl as his second wife. Gideon Gaunt, the Earl, only wanted me in his bed. He didn't have a shred of affection for me. For 7 years, I fulfilled my duties as the Countess perfectly, caring for his son and managing the Gaunt estate. But everything changed the day my hand slipped and I knocked over a teacup. A few drops of tea splattered onto one of Gideon's paintings. Gideon, who had always been cold to me, exploded in a fit of rage. Yarazane, do you forget your place? Who gave you permission to enter my study? He dragged me out of his quarters in front of everyone. The child I had raised and loved for 7 years, Caden, stood in the crowd. He watched with his arms crossed, his cold expression a mirror of his father's. I was exhausted body and soul. I decided to give up on them. Gideon sneered when he heard I wanted a divorce. The Zane family won't let you walk away from wealth and power. Besides, according to the laws of the district, a woman seeking a divorce must endure the lash. Do you have the stomach for that? The next day, the entire city was buzzing. The Countess had survived 49 strikes of the whip and walked away with her divorce papers. Finally, I was free. The day after I spilled the tea, I caught a severe chill. I had no choice but to call for a doctor. Your ladyship, your heart is heavy with grief. Your thoughts are too burdened for you to recover quickly, and... He hesitated. Please speak freely, I said. He sighed. You are already frail. The legacy-blocking tonics you've been taking are too harsh. I'm afraid you won't be able to conceive in the future. I froze, but then a wave of clarity washed over me. Gideon only saw me as a physical outlet. In his eyes, I was just a tool sent by the Zanes to maintain an alliance and babysit his heir. Why would he ever want me to have a child? He already had a woman in his heart. Yesterday, he returned early from his trip to the south. I was so eager to see him that I accidentally spilled a few drops of tea on a scroll. I was terrified the painting was ruined. I tried to unroll it carefully to blot the moisture. That was when I saw her. A woman in a fiery red riding outfit, galloping on a horse. She looked so alive, as if she were about to leap off the canvas. I had never seen a woman so vibrant. I was mesmerized. Then Gideon walked in. Seeing me with his painting triggered a terrifying fury. I knew it was my fault. I gritted my teeth and let him scream. Gideon didn't care about our years of marriage. He humiliated me, throwing me out to the servants' quarters. Don't you dare come near this room again without my permission. Thunder crashed, and a spring rain began to pour. I was the Countess, yet I stood there looking like a drowned rat, stripped of all dignity. The emotions swirled inside me, and by nightfall, I was burning with a high fever. Your ladyship, Master Caden is at the door. Caden was Gideon's eldest son, my cousin's child. I started to call him in, then remembered I was contagious. I stopped him immediately. Caden, you're so kind to come. It's just a cold. I'll be better in a few days. Don't worry. To my shock, Caden snapped back. My real mother was a refined lady, a master of the arts. Your father was just a lowly illegitimate scholar. You're a nobody with a murky past. How dare you call yourself my mother? I was stunned. Caden had only been away with Gideon for 6 months, and he had become a stranger. Seeing him deny me so righteously made my heart ache. In the past, whenever Gideon punished him, he would always run to me for comfort. Now he looked at me with nothing but disgust. I forced myself to stand up, staying behind the privacy screen. Caden, I have treated you like my own flesh and blood. I am the Earl's legally wedded wife. I deserve to be called your mother. Caden let out a cold snort. You're an uneducated woman. You don't deserve the title. I couldn't help but cough violently. Caden turned to leave, muttering, what bad luck. In the doorway, Gideon appeared. I thought he was still too angry to see me. Caden's attitude shifted instantly. He bowed respectfully to Gideon, then started peeking behind his father. I leaned forward curiously. A woman in red riding gear, holding a whip, stood right behind Gideon. It was the woman from the painting. Caden's face lit up. He bowed to her too. Miss Thorne. I learned then that Caden had tried to run away during their trip south. He was almost kidnapped, but Mona Thorne had saved him. Gideon and Mona had been classmates at the academy for 7 years. Their bond was deep. Mona is not only brilliant in literature, but her martial skills surpass many men. I want her to teach Caden riding and archery. Arrange a room for her. I was lying there sick, but Gideon didn't offer a single word of concern. Mona had been outside with Caden, cracking her whip for hours. When she heard her name, she stepped inside. I covered my mouth and coughed again. Gideon and Caden both reached out to shield Mona from me. Miss Thorne, don't let her infect you, Caden said. Careful you don't catch her filth, Gideon added, glancing at me with a frown. Mona gasped softly. The Countess should rest. I'll take care of Caden for you. Once you're better, I can teach you some moves to strengthen your body. The three of them looked so intimate. Like a real family. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit me. I will have someone prepare a room for Miss Thorne. I am unwell, so I won't be hosting anyone today. In the past, I would have dragged myself out of bed to handle everything for them. This was the first time I had ever asked them to leave. The bed was only a few steps away, yet I felt like I was walking through mud. My heart was ice cold. Was it worth sacrificing so much for people this heartless? I realized that if I stayed, I'd be spending the rest of my life serving a husband who didn't love me and a woman he actually desired. Everything felt dark. Could I survive on my own without them? I closed my eyes. A voice in my head whispered, "A woman can be free." I wanted a divorce. The moment the thought took root, the weight on my chest began to lift. Once my mind was made up, I recovered quickly. During those few days, neither Gideon nor Caden set foot in my room. I clutched the divorce papers, desperate to get Gideon's signature. When I reached his wing, the guards blocked me. "Apologies, your ladyship. The Earl has ordered that no one enters without a summons." But then I saw Mona Thorne stroll right into his study. I saw her tear pages from his favorite books to use as targets for a game. I saw Caden clapping and cheering for her. I saw Gideon watching her with a gaze so tender it hurt. I squeezed the papers in my hand and took a deep breath. "Please tell him I'm waiting in the courtyard. I have urgent business." Gideon looked at me through the window but acted as if I were invisible. Caden's voice drifted out, sounding annoyed. "Dad, is she just saying that to get your attention? How could the child I raised turn into this in just 6 months?" The guard looked guilty. "The master asks you to return to your room. He will see you when he is finished." I waited from noon until the moon rose. Then until the sun began to climb again. "Please, ma'am, go get some rest," my maid Shay begged for the 100th time. I thought I wouldn't sleep, but the moment my head hit the pillow, I drifted off. It wasn't until sunset that Gideon finally remembered I existed. He sat down, smoothing his coat, a lingering smile on his face. He smelled like fresh grass. The three of them had been at the royal stables all morning. Why would they remember me? "What is it?" "Caden and Mona are waiting for me for dinner." He was impatient, looking at the door instead of me. I placed the divorce papers on the table. He tapped his fingers on the wood. I assigned. He was irritated. "Yara Zane, do you even know what this is? Do I need to read it to you?" I gave a small laugh and curtsied. "You're joking, my lord. I wrote it myself." "Of course I know." Gideon picked up his tea and poured it over the papers. "You aren't the smartest woman, but you've always been obedient. I don't know who put these ideas in your head, but I'll let it slide this once. If there's a next time." I immediately pulled out another copy and handed it to him. "No one talked me into this. I want this divorce." Gideon finally looked at me. His face was a mask of shock and fury. "Is this because of Mona? She is talented. I brought her here to mentor Caden. With your limited education, how could you possibly raise him properly?" Even his explanation was an insult. I gripped my handkerchief, looking him in the eye. "You are the Earl. If it wasn't Mona today, it would be someone else tomorrow. None of that matters to me anymore. I just want out." Gideon stared at me. The sheer pressure of his status was suffocating, but I didn't blink. He snatched the papers and let out a harsh laugh. "And if I refuse? Your family will never agree to this. Stop acting like a spoiled child over nothing. If you stay in your place, I'll give you some respect. But a divorce? Never." "Is that so? Then let's see," I said. Gideon stormed out, his cloak snapping behind him. He didn't believe a weak, unloved woman like me could do anything. He was only angry because a submissive pawn had dared to challenge his authority. Early the next morning, I brought a box of supplements to Gideon's mother's wing. When Gideon was young, she had fallen off a cliff to protect him, leaving her legs paralyzed. Gideon respected no one more than his mother. I had only kept my title this long because I cared for her so meticulously. She smiled the moment she saw me. "Yara, why are you here so early?" I began to massage her legs, helping her with her simple exercises. "I missed you, mother, so I came early." She squeezed my hand. "Don't worry so much about my legs. As long as you and Gideon are happy, I have no regrets." I didn't want to lie to her, so I changed the subject. I handed the herbs and tonics to her nurse, giving detailed instructions on how to use them. The mother-in-law joked with the nurse. "She brought so much this time. Someone might think she's leaving us." I forced a smile. It was, after all, a final goodbye. Next, I went to Caden's wing. It had changed completely since his return. The courtyard was now filled with wooden training posts and sandbags. Inside, unfamiliar maids were tossing my hand-sewn clothes for him onto the floor. They knelt in terror when they saw me. "What is going on here?" They glanced at each other, too scared to speak. Caden walked in after lunch. He shoved me aside and pulled the maids up. "What are you doing here? Trying to interfere again? I'm grown now. I don't need your nagging or your fake clothes. If it weren't for you, my real mother might still be alive." I let out a cold laugh. "Your mother died giving birth to you. I cared for you for 7 years because she once helped me when I was a child. When you had the pox, I was the only one who stayed by your side. Her debt is paid. You are 7 years old. You should be in school, not playing soldier all day. Caden tried to argue, but I cut him off. I know you think Mona will teach you everything. But school is about building a network, not just books. That is my final advice to you. Whether you listen is up to you. As for your mother's dowry, I haven't touched a penny of it, except for the medicine for your grandmother. Here are the keys. It's your last safety net. Guard it well. For the sake of our past, I've left you an estate. You'll get the deed when you come of age. Caden curled his lip. Don't think this will make me pick you over Miss Thorne. I just smiled. This was the child I had raised for 7 years. I left the estate wearing no jewelry, dressed in plain clothes. I ran into Mona Thorne at the gate. She was wearing a jade hairpin I had seen in Gideon's study. I used to think it belonged to my cousin. Mona grabbed my hand familiarly. Sister, you look so plain. Where are you going? I pushed her hand away. None of your business. Mona huffed, then smirked. I'm taking Caden hunting. I heard you can't even ride a horse. I guess the Earl didn't think you were worth teaching. I ignored her and kept walking. I went to see the High Matriarch. Are you sure about this? She asked. I am. A tray with a barbed whip was brought out. In this city, if a woman of noble standing wants to force a divorce, she must endure this. The first strike fell. My clothes were instantly stained crimson. There were 49 strikes in total. By the end, I was a bloody mess on the floor. A crowd had gathered outside the gates. I heard the Earl found a new lover in the South. Men having mistresses is normal. But why can a man have many, while a woman must stay forever? No one risks their life for a divorce unless their heart is dead. The murmurs turned into whispers of encouragement. Hang in there, Miss Zane. Just a little more. You're almost free. The High Matriarch personally stamped the papers. As she handed them to me, she pressed a small vial into my hand. I bowed my head in thanks, knowing she had done everything she could to help me. I got into a carriage to head to a pre-booked inn. But there, I saw my father and the Zane elders bowing and scraping to Gideon. My father saw me and marched over. The scent of rain and horse sweat hung thick outside the Black Swan Inn. My father, Walter Zane, marched across the cobblestones with his fists clenched. His silk robes gathered in his hands to keep them from dragging through the mud. Behind him stood 3 senior elders of the Zane clan, their faces pale with anxiety, casting hurried glances at the mounted retinue of the Earl of Gaunt. Insolent wretch, my father hissed, reaching out to seize my shoulder. His fingers clamped down directly over the shredded linen of my collar. The barbed whip from the High Matriarch's courtyard had torn my flesh to ribbons. His touch sent a violent, agonizing jolt of fire down my spine. I did not scream. I merely turned my head, my eyes locking onto his. My father froze. In all my 24 years, he had known me only as the quiet, dutiful niece who bowed her head, the bastard's daughter who spoke in whispers, and stepped aside for her legitimate cousins. The woman standing before him now had blood dripping from her cuffs into the gray puddles beneath her boots. Yet her posture was as straight as an iron. Lance, unhand me, Master Zane, I said. My voice was raspy from the screaming I had swallowed in the courtyard, but it carried the weight of cold steel. How dare you speak to me in that tone? He sputtered, though his fingers loosened. Do you have any idea what you have done? 49 lashes. The entire capital is laughing at us. The Gaunt alliance is the bedrock of our family's grain monopoly. You will return to the manor this instant, kneel before Lord Gideon and beg for his mercy. Across the courtyard, Gideon Gaunt sat astride his black stallion. He wore a dark wool riding coat trimmed with silver wolf fur. His eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a strange, turbulent mixture of disbelief and fury. Beside him sat Mona Thorne, still wearing the crimson riding habit, looking down at my blood-soaked dress with a faint, mocking smile playing at the corners of her lips. Gideon dismounted with smooth, aristocratic grace. He walked toward me, his heavy leather boots splashing through the water, his hand resting on the pommel of his broadsword. Yara, Gideon said, stopping 3 paces away. His voice had lost its casual indifference. There was an edge of breathless tension in it. You actually went through with it. The decree is stamped, my lord, I replied, holding up the parchment with the High Matriarch's crimson wax seal. As of the midday bell, I am no longer Countess Gaunt. I am no longer your wife. Gideon stared at the red seal. His jaw worked, the muscle ticking violently beneath his skin. Do you think a scrap of parchment changes reality? Gideon scoffed, though his fingers tightened around his hilt. You have no money. You have no lands. Your father's family will cast you out before nightfall. You took 49 strikes of the barbed lash out of sheer, childish spite because I brought a guest into my home. He took another step forward, lowering his voice into that commanding, intimate tone he used whenever he demanded obedience in the dark of our bedchamber. Tear up the decree, Yara. The physician is waiting at the manor with burn salves. I will overlook this public spectacle. You may remain in the eastern wing, manage the household accounts, and care for Caden. That is more mercy than any other lord in the district would grant an ungrateful wife. I looked at him. For 7 years, I had memorized the line of his throat, the scent of his skin, the exact pitch of his breath when he was pleased or angered. I had spent 7 winters warming his hearth, nursing his mother, stitching his livery, and loving a child who was not my own. And standing here, soaked in my own blood, I felt nothing. The Earl of Gaunt was merely a handsome stranger made of stone and vanity. Lord Gideon, I said softly. The whip tore through my flesh, but it washed away 7 years of filth. I would rather bleed to death in the gutter than spend another night warming the bed of a man who looks at me and sees only an obedient dog. Mona Thorne let out a sharp, amused laugh from atop her mare. My lord, let her go. A woman of such low birth cannot comprehend noble generosity. She belongs in the mud. My father stepped between us, trembling with rage, and raised his cane toward my face. Yara, if you step 1 foot away from the Earl, I will strike your name from the ancestral register. You will be stripped of the Zane surname. You will have no clan, no inheritance, and no right to be buried in the family crypt. I reached into the bodice of my torn dress, pulled out a silver signet ring, the only token my late mother had left me, and tossed it into the puddle at my father's feet. Keep the name, Master Zane, I said, stepping past him into the doorway of the inn. My mother gave me her blood. My father gave me only an apology. From this day forward, I am Yara, daughter of no clan, servant to no lord. I turned my back on the Earl, on my father, and on the city that had cage-kept me for 7 years. The heavy oak doors of the inn closed behind me with a decisive, final thud. 3 days after the divorce decree was delivered to the High Court, a chilling rain settled over the Gaunt estate. In the master study, Gideon sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at a blank ledger. For 7 years, the household accounts had appeared on his desk every Monday morning at sunrise, leather-bound, cross-referenced, with expenses for the stables, the tenants' grain rations, the guards' wages, and the dowager Countess's medical tinctures written in a delicate, perfectly legible script. Today, the desk was empty, save for 3 overdue notices from the Royal Armory, and a frantic demand for payment from the capital's chief vintner. The study door flew open. Mona Thorne walked in, wearing an embroidered silk tunic and suede trousers. She carried a broken recurve bow in her hand, and tossed it onto the sofa with a frustrated huff. Gideon, the head groom at the stables, is an absolute peasant, Mona snapped, pouring herself a goblet of spiced wine without asking. I told him to saddle the black stallion for Caden's cross-country hunt, and he had the audacity to tell me the horse was reserved for your inspection of the southern dikes. Gideon looked up from his empty ledger, his brows furrowing. The dikes are flooding, Mona. 3 tenant villages are at risk of losing their spring harvest. The inspection is vital. Let the bailiff handle it. Mona waved her hand dismissively. Caden needs to build his martial spirit. A future Earl cannot be cooped up like a scholar. Oh, and the cook came to me asking for 50 gold sovereigns for the pantry stores. Why are the servants bothering me with such trivial garbage? Gideon pinched the bridge of his nose. A sharp, throbbing headache had begun behind his temples. Yara used to balance the kitchen ledgers every fortnight, Gideon said quietly. She negotiated directly with the Merchants Guild to keep our operating costs 20% below market rate. Mona's expression darkened with instant disdain. Are you comparing me to that groveling merchant's daughter? Mona sneered, leaning over the desk. I am the daughter of Baron Thorne. I studied military tactics and ancient literature at the Imperial Academy beside you. If you wanted a bookkeeper, Gideon, you should have hired a clerk, not expected an aristocratic woman of martial caliber to count sacks of flour. Before Gideon could reply, the door opened again. The Dowager Countess's personal maid, Martha, stumbled into the room, her apron stained with spilled medicine, her eyes red from crying. My lord, please, you must come. Martha wept, wringing her hands. The Dowager Countess, her fever has spiked again. Her legs are swelling, and she is crying out in agony. Gideon pushed his chair back and strode down the long, carpeted gallery toward his mother's quarters. The Dowager's bedchamber was suffocatingly hot, smelling of stale vinegar and burning tallow. His mother lay propped against the pillows, her face pale and sunken, her paralyzed legs twitching beneath the heavy wool blankets. Mother. Gideon knelt beside the bed, taking her cold, frail hand. What is wrong? Did the physician not bring the southern lotus root? The old woman turned her clouded eyes toward her son. Her voice was a cracked, wheezing whisper. Gideon, where is Yara? Gideon's chest tightened. Mother, Yara has left the estate. Miss Thorne is Managing the household now. Mona knows nothing of medicine. The dowager coughed, clutching her son's fingers with surprising strength. The root she bought was dry. It burned my throat. For 7 years, Yara boiled the willow bark 3 times at dawn. She rubbed the oil into my joints until the swelling receded. She sat with me through the long winter nights when the cold settled in my bones. A single tear rolled down the old woman's withered cheek. "You fool, Gideon," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mother's profound sorrow. "You thought you married a servant. You threw away the only daughter this house ever had." Gideon stood frozen by the bed. The heavy silence of the room seemed to press against his chest like an iron plate. In the eastern courtyard, 7-year-old Caden stood before the wooden quinton, holding an iron-tipped training sword that was 3 inches too long for his small frame. His hands were blistered, the skin on his palms raw and bleeding where the coarse leather grip had rubbed against his skin. Again. Mona shouted from the shade of the veranda, cracking her riding whip against the stone balustrade. "A true warrior does not drop his guard. If you cannot strike the target 20 times without resting, you will have no dinner tonight, Caden." Caden bit his lower lip, tears welling in his eyes. He lifted the heavy blade, his small shoulders trembling with exhaustion, and lunged forward. The tip of the sword struck the wooden shield at an awkward angle. The recoil reverberated up his arm, twisting his wrist with a sickening pop. Caden cried out, dropping the sword, and collapsed onto the gravel, clutching his swollen wrist to his chest. "Get up," Mona barked, walking toward him with an impatient frown. "Stop crying. Like a weakling. Your father was leading cavalry charges at 12 years old. It hurts." Caden sobbed, looking around the courtyard with wide, terrified eyes. Instinctively, the boy turned toward the corridor leading to the eastern wing, the wing where Yara's rooms were. In the past, whenever he fell, whenever he caught a fever or scraped his knees, soft, warm hands would lift him from the ground. Yara would carry him to her sunlit parlor, wash his cuts with sweet-smelling lavender water, wrap his wrists in soft silk bandages, and feed him honeyed biscuits while singing old northern lullabies until he fell asleep in her lap. "Mother!" Caden choked out, scrambling to his feet, running toward the eastern wing. "Mother Yara." He pushed open the heavy wooden doors of her chambers. The rooms were cold, dark, and empty. The curtains were drawn. The hearth was filled with gray, dead ash. On the center table sat the keys to his mother's dowry chests, neatly labeled, with small parchment tags in her precise hand, alongside the small wooden horse she had carved for his 5th birthday. There was no lavender scent. There were no honey biscuits. There was only the hollow, mocking echo of the spring wind whistling through the garden lattice. Caden stood in the center of the dark room, holding his broken wrist, his breath catching in his throat. "She's really gone," he whispered. The memory of his own cruel words from 3 days ago rushed back into his mind. "You're an uneducated woman. You don't deserve the title." The little boy dropped to his knees on the cold floorboards, buried his face into the embroidered cushion Yara had hand-stitched for him, and began to wail. 300 miles to the north, at the foot of the Dragon's Spine Mountains, the town of Oakhaven was bustling with commerce. In the sun-drenched courtyard of the White Crane Apothecary, the air smelled of drying sage, crushed pine needles, and sweet almond oil. I stood beside a long wooden drying rack, wearing an indigo linen tunic with the sleeves rolled to my elbows, inspecting a tray of rare northern snow ginseng. My back had healed. The scars remained, 49 faint, pale silver ridges crossing my skin like a warrior's map, but the pain was gone, replaced by a strength and clarity I had never known in the suffocating halls of the Gaunt manor. My grandfather had not been an illegitimate scholar. He had been the grand herbalist to the late emperor, a master botanist who had compiled the 12 volumes of northern flora before political rivals drove him into self-imposed exile in the borderlands. For 7 years, I had hidden my education, my knowledge of medicine, and my fluency in classical languages, playing the simple, submissive wife Gideon desired. Now my grandfather's heritage was mine to claim. "Lady Yara," a crisp, respectful voice called out from the archway. I turned around. Standing in the courtyard was Duke Julian Vance, the commander of the northern border garrison and cousin to the reigning emperor. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man of 30 with sharp, intelligent gray eyes, wearing a dark leather cuirass over a woolen tunic. He carried a silver dispatch tube sealed with the imperial dragon emblem. "Lord Julian," I bowed with quiet grace, "are the supply wagons for the northern forts ready?" 300 crates of anti-frostbite salve and purified willow tincture. "Precisely as you formulated," Julian said, his lips curving into a warm, genuine smile. "The garrison surgeons report that troop mortality from winter gangrene has dropped by 80% since you took over the supply lines." He walked over to the drying racks, watching my hands work with effortless admiration. The Imperial Ministry of War has taken notice, Yara, Julian added, tapping the silver dispatch tube. The Crown has issued a royal warrant appointing you Grand Director of the Northern Medical Logistics Bureau. You hold the authority of an Imperial Minister. I looked at the silver tube, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of peace settle over my heart. 7 years of managing a noble household had not made me small. It had trained me to manage an empire. Thank you, Julian, I said softly. Julian stepped closer, his gaze steady and filled with a deep, unshakable respect. You earned this with your own mind, Yara. Tomorrow, we ride for the capital. The Emperor has summoned all regional lords and logistics directors to the Spring Solstice Summit at the Imperial Palace. I looked south toward the blue horizon. Then let us ride, I said. The Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace in the capital was a masterpiece of white marble, gilded pillars, and soaring crystal chandeliers. 500 nobles, regional governors, and military commanders in formal court regalia filled the tiered galleries. At the front left bench sat Gideon Gaunt, looking worn and haggard. His coat was made of expensive velvet, but the seams were pulling. His estate was on the verge of bankruptcy after 3 failed harvests and the cancellation of his royal grain contracts due to logistical chaos. Beside him sat Mona Thorne, wearing an ostentatious gown of crimson satin that drew critical whispers from the high society matrons for its vulgarity. Caden sat between them, pale thin, his right wrist wrapped in a stiff, awkward splint that had healed crookedly. Gideon, Mona hissed under her breath, fanning herself aggressively. Why did the Chancellor demand our attendance? If this is about the grain delivery delays, you can simply tell him the tenant farmers were lazy. Silence, Mona, Gideon muttered, his voice hoarse. The Emperor himself is presiding over the military logistics restructuring today. If we lose the Northern Transport concession, the Gaunt title will be ruined. The herald's bronze horn sounded from the grand dais. Make way for the Grand Director of the Northern Logistics Bureau, Master of the Imperial Apothecary, Lady Yara of Oakhaven. The massive golden double door swung open. A sudden, breathless silence swept through the 500 assembled nobles. Walking down the crimson carpet between an escort of 12 elite Imperial guards was me. I wore a floor-length robe of deep midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver phoenixes and botanical vines along the hem. My hair was styled with delicate silver pins and white jade blossoms. My chin was lifted, my posture regal, radiating an effortless authority that commanded the entire room. Beside me walked Duke Julian Vance, his hand resting on his ceremonial sword, his presence shielding me like an impenetrable fortress. When Gideon saw me, his wine goblet slipped from his fingers, crashing against the marble floor, dark red wine splashing across his polished boots. Yara? Gideon gasped, rising from his bench, his eyes bulging in utter shock. Caden gasped, his little hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, tears instantly flooding his eyes. Mother Yara. Mona Thorne's face turned an ugly, mottled gray. That's impossible. She's an outcast. A divorced beggar. I walked past the Gaunt family bench as if they were made of empty air. I stopped before the imperial throne, bowed with flawless court etiquette to the Emperor, and presented the leather-bound ledger of Northern supply accounts. Your Imperial Majesty, I spoke, my voice ringing clear and melodious across the vast hall. The Northern border reserves are fully secured. 3 million bushels of grain and 80,000 crates of medical supplies have reached the frontier fortresses ahead of schedule. The Emperor smiled warmly, raising his hand. Splendidly done, Lady Yara. Your grandfather's brilliance lives on in your service to the realm. We hereby grant you the hereditary title of Viscountess of Oakhaven and permanent stewardship of the northern trade routes. The hall erupted into thunderous applause. As the court adjourned for the banquet, nobles and ambassadors swarmed around me, eager to secure contracts with the new Viscountess. Gideon broke through the crowd, his face pale, his breath ragged, shoving past 2 foreign envoys. Yara, Gideon cried, his voice cracking with desperation. I paused, turning my head slightly. Julian Vance stepped forward, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade, but I raised a single hand, signaling him to wait. Gideon stopped 2 paces away, looking at me with a wild, pleading gaze. He dropped to one knee right there on the palace marble, in front of 60 noble houses. Yara, forgive me, Gideon choked out, tears streaming down his face. I was blind. I was a fool. My mother is dying. Caden cannot write with his broken hand. The estate is falling apart. I need you. Please come back to the Gaunt Manor. I will cast Mona out tonight. I will make you Countess again with full authority over every estate, every coin, every servant. I looked down at the Earl of Gaunt. I remembered the spring rain outside his study. I remembered the teacup. I remembered the 49 strikes of the barbed whip cutting into my flesh. While the crowd watched, Lord Gideon, I said, my voice quiet, carrying the clean, cold purity of mountain snow. You did not lose me because you brought another woman into your house. You lost me because you believed that my devotion was a debt I owed you, rather than a gift you never deserved. Caden stumbled forward from behind his father, his splinted wrist trembling, sobbing hysterically as he reached for the hem of my silk robe. Mother, please. Caden wept, dropping to his knees beside Gideon. My wrist hurt so much. The maids are mean to me. Miss Thorne yells at me. I'm sorry. Said you weren't my mother. Please come home. I looked down at the boy I had loved for 7 years. I felt a faint, lingering ache for the child he had once been, but the bond had been severed with the same knife he had wielded against me. I did not let his hands touch my silk. I took one step back. Master Caden, I said gently, but with absolute distance. I gave you 7 years of my life. I gave you warmth, medicine, and love. You chose to cast it into the dirt for a woman who held a whip. The world is a harsh teacher, young master. Learn its lessons well. I turned my back on the kneeling father and son. Duke Julian Vance offered me his arm. I took it, resting my hand lightly over the dark wool of his sleeve. Together, we walked down the grand marble staircase, through the soaring arches of the palace gates, and out into the brilliant, golden sunlight of the northern horizon. Behind us, in the vast, echoing silence of the grand hall, the Earl of Gaunt remained on his knees in the dust, clutching the empty air of a life he had dismantled with his own blind, arrogant hands.